This webinar is one of a series of technical assistance events that SEAC conducts with state and local education agencies throughout the years. And one of the central themes that's emerged in our discussions with states and schools and school districts across the country is the importance of having truly coordinated strategies to address chronic absenteeism from the school to the district to the state level. As you all know, chronic absenteeism has a wide range of causes, which means virtually every office and department at all levels of the school system has a role to play. The purpose of our webinar today is to provide the network of states, districts, and intermediary organizations working to address chronic absenteeism with promising practices from states that have been developing exactly these types of coordinated responses. Our panelists will discuss what these strategies look like, the type of organizational infrastructure they're using to coordinate their work, how their states collaborate with schools and districts, and the importance of strong leadership to support these efforts. We encourage you in the audience to reach out directly to our panelists if you'd like to learn more, and SEAC is always happy to help broker these conversations. So please reach out to us if you would like to connect with the panelists, or you can just reach out to them directly. And again, we really hope that you learn from what Connecticut and Washington are doing and see potential strategies, potential structures, approaches to addressing chronic absenteeism that you could potentially adapt to your state. Now, I'd like to introduce our panelists and start our presentations. First off, we're going to hear from Kari Sullivan Custer, a state education consultant with the Connecticut State Department of Education, on how Connecticut is developing those comprehensive state strategies and also working with their school districts. We'll take questions after Kari's presentation if you want to learn more about what Connecticut is doing. So again, please feel free to drop those questions in the chat, and we'll stop after Kari has finished with her presentation to take questions. Next up, we're going to hear from Krissy Johnson, the Assistant Director of Attendance and Engagement at Washington's Office of State Superintendent for Public Instruction, and she'll be joined by Jenna Millet, who's an Attendance and Re-engagement Specialist, also with Washington's Office of State Superintendent of Public Instruction. We'll stop a couple of times through their presentation to take questions. So again, don't be shy, put your questions in, and at the end, we'll do any concluding questions, and if we have time, we'll invite folks to come off their mics and ask questions directly, or just continue to drop them in the chat. I see folks are already introducing themselves in the chat. That's great. Let us know who you are, where you're from. And again, make sure to keep those questions coming during our presentation. But with that, I'd like to turn it over to Kari to start us off talking about the work that she's doing in Connecticut. And we've asked Kari to begin her presentation by telling us a little bit of the story of how Connecticut got to where it is, because we know a lot of states are doing really good work on chronic absenteeism. They're working in different areas across their different state programs, but the work isn't always being coordinated comprehensively across all those departments, across all those agencies, and sometimes it can be challenging to figure out what's that next step. What do you need to do to pull those different strands of work together into an overall comprehensive approach? So with that, Kari, why don't you tell us how the work started off in Connecticut, and then tell us what you've been working on.
Thank you so much, Charles. Good afternoon. My name is Kari Sullivan Custer, and I'm with the State of Connecticut Department of Education, and it's my pleasure to talk to you today about our systemic approach to addressing chronic absence. Next slide, please. First, I'd like to just introduce you to Connecticut. Though Connecticut is a small state, it's also incredibly diverse. Folks may think of Connecticut and have sort of this country club image of Connecticut, but I challenge you to reconsider your perception, because while there certainly are pockets that look like this, Connecticut also has large, diverse metropolitan areas, such as Hartford, New Haven, and Bridgeport, where the demographics are considerably more diverse, and the vast majority of cities' populations are made up of people of color. We have over 500,000 students, over 50% of whom identify as non-white. About 53% are high needs students, meaning they fall in either one of the categories of high needs: students with disabilities, special education, or free lunch are one of our buckets of high needs. So that is a little portrait of our populations in Connecticut. Our diversity has grown tremendously over the last 10 years for our students. You'll see our teachers of color is only at 11.2%. That's not growing at the same speed, and we have lots of initiatives to diversify our teachers of color. So on the right, you can see the chronic absenteeism rates for the last decade. Before the pandemic, we were at just about 10%. And then when the pandemic hit, we went up to 23.7% in 21-22, which is went from about 60,000 students being chronically absent to 120,000. And we're really pleased to see our numbers go down this year. Never thought I would say our chronic absence rate is at 20%, and that makes us feel better. That's still 100,000 students who are chronically absent. And through these years, I want to kind of give you a timeline of this work. It's been a collaboration between our performance office and our program office. You know, we've got to measure the data, and we've had lots of great data in Connecticut around chronic absenteeism. And then the program office working to support districts on strategies and interventions. So back in 2000, as long ago as 2008, Connecticut defined, our State Board of Ed defined in attendance, which means a student has to be present for at least half the school day to be marked in school for that day. If they're not in school half a day, they're marked absent. And so that was done in 2008. And then in 2012, we defined excused and unexcused absences so that all schools were working with the same definitions and policies. 2015 was a big year for us with chronic absence, and you can see in these trends here, our chronic absence rate went down to 9.6, and we were thrilled about that. And chronic absence was defined in our legislature in 2015. We also had school attendance teams, school and district attendance teams. In 2015, were required for all schools with a chronic absence rate over 15% and all districts with a chronic absence rate over 10%. And those numbers were really low back in 2015-16, but right now, the vast majority of our schools and districts are required to have a school attendance team or a district attendance team. This is certainly addressing attendance is not the job for one person. It is all hands on deck. We also developed guidelines for improving chronic absence in partnership with Attendance Works. But when we did that, we invited our districts to come in and give us feedback. So those were released in 2017. You can see we started to go up a little bit in 2017-18. We had some legislation that came in that we had in-school suspensions were more than a half a day would be marked absent, and then we were able to correct that. That's no longer the case, but it did impact those policy decisions that are made to impact our attendance rates. So, and in Connecticut, we consider chronic absence all absences. It's just a measure of lost time of learning. It tells us who's missed too much school, and we want to find out why and get to the reasons behind it so we can support our students. We still have truancy in Connecticut. It's 4 unexcused absences in a month or 10 unexcused absences in a year. So when we think about the difference between truancy and chronic absence, it's not just a difference on how the numbers are tallied, but rather a mindset shift. While truancy is typically more punitive and emphasizes compliance, when we think about a chronic absence model, we are thinking about how to cultivate family and student engagement, emphasizing the benefit of being present at school and using preventative problem solving and trauma sensitive strategies. Since 2017 and since the pandemic, we've had peer learning networks for our districts. We call them opportunity districts, or our 10 lowest performing districts. I think that's part of the ESSA plan. And we brought in Attendance Works and their fantastic consultants to come out and help 8 of our districts. And that really helped create that foundation. That was just before the pandemic. So they got a lot of information around attendance. So next slide, please. So I just gave you a timeline sort of we started in 2008 and what's happened all the way through to the beginning, just before the pandemic, when we had our peer learning network, which happened over a series of 4 months. We brought the districts in for half a day. The teams came in. Attendance Works has done this in many states and districts for really intensive teamwork. on how to address what's their data look like, what do their policies look like, how are they addressing attendance, how will climate and culture look like. And so without this longstanding effort surrounding with accountability, data integrity, staff capacity, I've been in my position full-time on attendance now for over 10 years. That's significant for a district to have. And I have a lot of support from many of my colleagues across the district. We wouldn't have had this foundation built on for addressing attendance when the pandemic hit. So you'll see our numbers here. The blue line is our high need students, and the green line are all students. And you'll see how they parallel each other, with the high need students being students with disabilities, students on free and reduced lunch, and our L's being significantly higher than all our other students. So I just wanted to share that with you as well. Next slide, please. So this is an oldie but a goodie. It's called Chronic Early Absence, What States Can Do. And it was an article that was in Kaplan magazine written by Charlene Russell Tucker, who's our commissioner now, and myself and Hetty Chang. And it was sort of, the Connecticut experience suggests that states are well positioned to reduce chronic absence by engaging in these 6 strategies. And when I was preparing for today, I thought, you know what, these 6 strategies still work. We needed to build awareness. So what does that mean? We share early on, 2012 and earlier, we share the evidence and the research about why attendance is important. How a preventative approach using positive conditions for learning better than a truancy approach. And we identified multiple audiences and stakeholders to spread the message. We created these, we used data to promote action. So we presented data in easy to interpret graphs that sort of were like aha moments when you saw the difference between students on free and reduced lunch with chronic absence and students not on free and reduced and chronic absence. And we compared their 4-year graduation rate. It was significant graph to catch your attention about what the difference is in attendance and why it's important. What's the difference in chronic absence and daily attendance? So it's who are the students that are missing school or who's in school every day. So what are the differences? And then we cultivate champions. Our biggest champion in Connecticut is our commissioner, but we had legislators. We had Hetty Chang came to the state a lot and worked with us. And we've had former commissioners who were champion of this work. But district leaders who were doing this work and being successful were great ambassadors for getting the word out. And then building capacity, I mentioned the peer learning network. We did sort of a multi-tiered approach to building capacity. So we have something called Talk Tuesdays, which are every other Tuesday for an hour. We bring folks in. It's virtual, and we always have a content specialist. Today we had a presentation on data, and then we usually have a school district talking about their bright spot. So all districts are invited to that. And then for tier 2, we have more peer learning networks. We call them PLN with our charter schools last year, and they worked intensely with Attendance Works and our partners at SEAC, the State Education Resource Center, to improve their attendance, and they did see improvements in their chronic absence. And then we have LEAP 101, which I'll get into in a little bit, which is a home visiting model that's very strategic for how to reach certain families and students on addressing attendance. So identifying and leveraging bright spots. There are people in every state and districts and leaders who are making a difference. So even if their chronic absence rate is going in the wrong direction, they usually have something that works. And we take the little bites. Like it doesn't have to be like you tremendously changed your chronic absence, but maybe you were able to engage your kindergarten families and bring them into the school, and you saw an increase in that one classroom. So you're learning about different strategies from other districts. And we are getting ready to release a high school bright spots brief with Attendance Works. Should be released by the end of the month, where we feature 7 high schools and what they've done to improve chronic absence. We foster accountability. That's part of the ESSA plan. Attendance is measure number 4 in our accountability report, and it measures it includes chronic absence twice in the accountability report. Once for all students, you get up to 50 points, I believe, for chronic absence. Under the total points if your chronic absence is under 5%, and no points if your chronic absence is over 30 points, and then there's a sliding scale. But you get that for all students, but we also measure high need students, and then you get the same 50 points for high need students on a sliding scale from 5% to 30%. So we take that pretty seriously in Connecticut. Next slide, please. So some lessons learned. So use data to inform strategies and interventions. So we make data publicly available. We push out data. We encourage school districts to push out data to your principals every week or every 2 weeks, because they're not going to have the time to go in and find the attendance data. So districts who have really taken a strategic approach are pushing out their data to their principals on a regular basis. Connecticut shifted from a annual attendance collection to a monthly data collection on attendance right at the beginning of the pandemic. And so since September 2021, we have had access to monthly, year-to-date chronic absence and average daily attendance data for at the district and school level and by all of the student groups. And I cannot tell you how helpful that has been for me in my support with districts and just analyzing the data for all of our LEAP districts and how the trends are going over the years. I can tell you we see a big spike in December and January when we see our COVID, flu, and RSV, the respiratory illnesses go up. But last year, we were able to see a nice decline every single month through June with chronic absence. And these are from the efforts that are happening in our district. Taking a positive approach to chronic absence. I cannot emphasize this enough. I wish, I know we have truancy in our statute, but the word truancy means we're in trouble to families. So the more you can stay away from saying that term for families or labeling or giving someone a title of truancy officer, that just signals sort of that old school juvenile justice, we're in trouble. Whereas if you have a family engagement specialist or a student engagement specialist, someone positive is going out to help the families, take that positive approach to build relationships, not push families away. Building communities of support. I talked about Talk Tuesday and the peer learning networks. We've also we're setting up affinity groups where we're going to have small groups of districts come together to talk about particular topics. We're going to have a high school affinity group. It's all voluntary. Nobody's forced to do it. And if you want to talk about high school attendance with other districts, we've found that the districts want to learn from each other. They love talking to me at the state, and they love hearing from the experts in these wonderful webinars, but they really learn a lot for each other. So the state can create these opportunities for them to come together and learn together, like Talk Tuesdays and these affinity groups. Policy guidance that's clear and aligned with research-informed practices, both at the school and the state level, the district and the state level. Sometimes I'll go into districts and they'll say, well, this is our policy. And I'll say, well, your policy is really out of alignment with the state guidance and with research. This is not really part of this, but I encourage all districts and all schools to look at those letters you're sending home to your parents. Look at the tone of the letter. Look at what you're featuring on the letter. Do we want students to come to school because the statute says they have to come to school? Or do we want students to come to school because it's best for kids to come to school, both academically and socially, emotionally, and physically, for physical activity with their children and school lunch and breakfast? Just a lot of different reasons why it's important for kids to come into school. But generally, our letters home to parents can sound threatening and emphasize why the statute says they need to come to school. So think about that. And I encourage districts to look at those letters. Cross-agency collaboration. In Connecticut, I work with offices, all the offices in our department. I work with our turnaround office, our special education, multilingual learners, family engagement, student support, and especially our performance office. We work together a lot, especially troubleshooting questions and issues districts might have about a student who has not been coming to school or has unenrolled from school. But in Connecticut, you can't unenroll in school from school. A parent cannot take a student out of school until they're 17, and this year only at 17 if they're enrolled in adult ed. So if a student is coded as exiting a school, we look into that and we troubleshoot between myself and the performance office how to support our districts. So lots of cross-agency collaboration, but there's also state-level teams. We have a external attendance and engagement advisory team with representation from different roles. So we have someone from a district who represents administrators in a small district, or an administrator from one of our large districts, family engagement, folks who are a director of special ed, folks who are in charge of family engagement and climate and culture. We have someone who's a school social worker and someone who's a school counselor, so that we know that attendance is at the heart of all of this work in schools. And so everyone, it's all hands on deck. Everyone has to be involved. And we want to hear the different perspectives about what's happening in attendance in our schools and districts. I'm watching my time, but the last thing is blending funding. So we use funds like Title IV, Section A, IDEA. We pay for Talk Tuesday through IDEA funds, through dropout prevention, ARPA, ESSER funds, and local dollars. So you really have to blend your resources. So those are some of the lessons learned. And the next slide, I talk a little bit about leading districts to success. So So this is sort of my guidance on how to work with districts, or how we work with districts in Connecticut. We approach districts with empathy and understanding. It's a similar approach to how we want to approach our families, really. It's a relationship focused and meeting them where they are. We can see a district who is doing a change in leadership can make a huge change for a district. We can see a district who's right on top of things, but then they get a new leader. And so a lot of the systems and structures lose their reinforcement, and they have to kind of reestablish themselves with the new leaders. So building personal relationships. One thing I did with two of our largest districts, is we went out for coffee. I brought them out. The two of my leaders in our largest districts met for coffee, and I didn't have to be there, but just connecting them together to build those personal relationships, so they have like-minded folks with like jobs to support each other. Creating those opportunities to learn together, directing all stakeholders to current and meaningful data, expanding training opportunities. And we facilitate the development of marketing toolkits. I saw the question in the chat about how do we communicate with families. We've worked very closely with Attendance Works, and they have print ready in many, many languages toolkits for how to communicate with families, and we've used those in the past. We are creating a pretty large scale with billboards and TV ads and radio and social media this year, called Better With You. School is Better With You. And so that's something that's going to have a toolkit with materials for sharing with families, and districts will be able to download those materials and print them themselves. We'll also have some funding left from ARPA, ESSER, federal relief dollars to help create some materials to go out on our home visits and for schools too. Schools love banners, so we create large banners they can hang in front of their school. That's very eye-catchy and talks about how important it is to school. And school is better with you. It's better with you here, and to get that message out to families and to adolescents. So I wanted to talk a little bit about LEAP. I'll just wrap up. I didn't put a LEAP slide in here, but I wanted to mention it as one of the supports that we're doing for districts and how we get information out to families, especially those families who are chronically absent. LEAP was launched in the beginning of 2021 based on our chronic absence data that was showing students who were remote learners and in our large urban districts were not coming to school. They were not showing up online. They were not showing up in school. And so LEAP is Connecticut's research-based relational home visit model. It's proven to increase student attendance and family engagement. So there was, before COVID, we had attendance issues and a need to re-engage families, but after COVID, it just grew significantly. And I see we're putting in the report for the evaluation. So we knew we had to build better relationships with families to better understand and address the barriers to attendance so we could hear from them. We also knew that teachers were overextended and did not have the capacity to spearhead this challenge. So instead, we needed to expand capacities and people power to reach out to families and leverage the assets of community-based organization. So LEAP was launched in 15 districts. It's voluntary in that all home visitors are paid, but they're not forced to do it. Only folks who want to do the home visits are asked to do. We don't want people visiting who don't want to do it. And it's voluntary on the families. There's always a phone call and an invitation. And one thing that we developed LEAP with Attendance Works and Parent Teacher Home Visits helped us. And our REST, our regional education centers, it's a multi-visit model. So you don't just go once and done. It's not canvassing. You call, you make an appointment, you go the first time, and you talk about how are you. You don't talk about attendance behavior or academics. You just, how is the family and how can we help you? And you let the family talk, and then you listen. So it's flexible, it's culturally responsive. Districts are encouraged to staff home visitor positions with people who come from the communities they serve, even if they need to partner with local community-based organizations. And the research and the findings was remarkable. Visits that were made in person had more impact than virtual visits or phone calls. In person doesn't have to be the home, it can be a public place. But 1 month after the initial home visit, there was a 4% increase in attendance. 6 months after, for pre-K to grade 5, there was a 10% point increase in attendance. And this is for grades 6 through 12, there was a 20% point increase in attendance after the initial home visit. That's really significant. And results did not differ based on title of personnel conducting the home visit, whether they were certified or non-certified, or whether the home visitor was the school district or from a community-based organization. And I just wanted to share that with you. Connecticut, we have a Connecticut Home Visit Hub that offers training on the LEAP 101 home visits. It's really for the home visitors on the approach to take, what to do with the first phone call and what to do on the home visit, how to use the home visitor log to collect the data. Those trainings are open to all. I'll put the LEAP home visitor page or the LEAP webpage in the chat. But we have people from all over the country taking trainings with us for LEAP. And we've had people from about 60 districts in Connecticut trained in our LEAP home visitor approach. Doesn't mean you're going to get a grant or you're going to get funding for positions, but if you have positions of people doing home visits, it's a great way to get them trained in a model that works. I think that's it.
Thanks so much, Kari. Now we're opening it up for a few questions. If you want to go ahead, drop your questions in the chat for Kari. We've also put those resources in the chat as well, so you can get additional information. But Kari, while we're waiting for any questions that come in through the chat, I've got a question. Talk about what the key interface is between your school districts and the state that enables all the collaboration, that you talked about. You talked a little bit about Talk Tuesday, but sort of what is that body, that structure that enables you to collaborate with, share information between the state and the district level?
Well, it's sort of multi-tiered. If it's a district that has is a high need district with high levels of chronic absence, we've set up cross-divisional teams in Connecticut to work with these 10 districts. And I sit on that team and provide technical support to those larger districts. But otherwise, I've developed relationships with folks through Talk Tuesday. They're always invited. People come when they can. It's informal. They register once and come. Today we had 98 people on Talk Tuesday. And it's a great way for people who are new to attendance to kind of get up to speed. It also helps me if there's districts that don't come to Talk Tuesday, I kind of know they're not really checked into attendance, right? So and they meet each other and they follow up with each other. So I would say Talk Tuesday is key.
Great. And I also just heard, there are multiple touch points, multiple ways to connect with folks.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, if you have additional questions for Kari, drop them in the chat. Again, we'll take questions for everybody at the end as well. But it is just about time to introduce our colleagues from Washington State. So Krissy and Jenna, we're going to turn the panel over to you. And again, starting out with the same question, if you could tell us a little bit, about Washington and how you got started working in a more coordinated fashion at the state level around chronic absenteeism. With that, take it away.
Thank you so much, Charles, and thank you for inviting us to speak today. My name is Krissy, as Charles said, and I've been working on attendance at Washington State's Education Agency for 7 years. And I always, every time Kari speaks, I learn from her. And so just to know that we will share our story today, and we still have a lot to learn. I took notes as Kari was speaking today. So hopefully some of the things that we do might seed some ideas for you, and knowing that all of you out there are also doing wonderful things in your state. So with that, I can tell you a little bit about Washington State. If you can go to the next slide. We have 295 school districts serving 1.1 million students. And this is a breakdown of our population by race and ethnicity. One of the aspects that I wanted to share with you, kind of capturing one aspect of the students in our state. And our regular attendance rate was 67% in 2021-22. That is the inverse of chronic absence. So we had a 33% chronic absence rate in 21-22, which was a decrease of 17.7% from before the pandemic. So attendance is a big concern right now. Next slide, please. Charles, to answer your question, you can go ahead and click through this slide pretty quickly here. There were just a number of factors that spurred investment and awareness around chronic absenteeism in Washington State. We had published performance metrics in 2014 that showed districts where they stood compared to other districts on a number of different performance measures. This was before ESSA. And Attendance Works, as you all know, was a significant inspiration and support in some of those early days. We also saw through the OCR data, the Office of Civil Rights data, that showed Washington to have one of the highest rates of chronic absenteeism across the nation, which spurred a lot of our initial work in the early years around attendance awareness campaigns, partnering with other agencies, with our communications team, and distributing materials, including posters and door hangers to local districts. The buy-in awareness started to build even more, particularly when we included chronic absence as one of the school quality and student success measures as part of ESSA. And we had a number of significant legislative changes in the last several years, primarily impacting truancy, but requiring significant more early intervention from schools and districts, not only around truancy, but also on chronic absenteeism. And I would say right now we have the most attention than we've ever had from leadership, from legislators around attendance because of COVID and the pandemic recovery. And we are hoping to build as much champion support as Connecticut has around attendance in our state. Next slide, please. Some of the things that enable us to do our work are the legislation that passed in 2016, funded staff at the SEA. And while that seems like a no-brainer, what we know in this work is if you don't have people to do the work, it can't get done. And so it means a lot that the legislature recognized and funded state level staff to address attendance and truancy. And our team will be growing, so we continue to identify funding to support that work, which enables us to have ongoing and regular communication between our SEA programs. Now, here's an aspiration that we have, which is to have more internal alignment across programs, looking at data and strategizing around addressing chronic absenteeism and attendance. Next slide, please. Lacking that formal structure, we do have some successful highlights of where we've partnered with other SEA programs. I want to start by sharing we have a deep and wonderful relationship with our Office of Native Education, specifically around our attendance and re-engagement project, where we work specifically with the State Tribal Education Compact schools, as well as several districts that serve a high population of Native students. And that partnership has been essential for bringing a cultural lens and contextualizing the supports that we provide, bringing to bear the unique both cultural and historical experience of Native learners and communities in our state. Another highlight has been working with our behavioral health program to develop a youth toolkit, because 2 years ago, the legislature required that all absences due to mental health be excused. And so we engaged with our behavioral health team to work with youth to develop a toolkit, a social media toolkit to help them navigate their mental health challenges and what to do when experiencing mental health absences. We have, unlike Connecticut, we have a different set of laws, or maybe a gap in our laws, where school districts can withdraw students without a confirmation that they are enrolled elsewhere. We've been really trying to troubleshoot this issue and provide different guidance, but we couldn't do that without other parts of our agency, including our student information, who kind of owns the reporting of enrollment data, and then our apportionment, who collects data on which students should be claimed for funding. So it's a complex partnership, but nonetheless a really important one. And then lastly, we work closely and have worked really closely in the past with our school improvement team, who has a cadre of continuous improvement partners that are working at the local level, building the capacity of schools and districts. A number of schools now have attendance as a school improvement goal, and so we work with that team to build their capacity as coaches out in the field, working with the schools in improvement. Next slide. I think with that, we wanted to take a pause. Is that right, Charles?
Yeah, absolutely. So before Krissy and Jenna talk a little bit in more detail about their work with school districts, wanted to see if there were questions about Washington's overall approach, things that you wanted to know about what Krissy had just discussed. Feel free to drop those questions into the chat. So we'll just give folks a minute to pause to see if any questions are coming in. Right, and I also dropped in the link to the mental health absences resources that Washington has developed, so you can see what Krissy was talking about there and read about additional resources and policies that Washington has. All right, well, Krissy and Jenna, I'm not seeing any additional questions, but again, want to encourage folks to drop those in the chat. We'll also take questions at the end of the presentation as well, but why don't you go ahead and talk a little bit about how you're working with your school districts in Washington.
Great, thank you so much. One of the things that we find helpful is to differentiate our work at the state level from, say, a school district. And so our team has landed on these 4 primary buckets of where we need to put our energy, our unique role as the SEA. And they include policy, data, communications, and capacity building. And we'll reference these buckets as we go through the next slides. With that, I'll hand it over to Jenna. Next slide.
Thank you, Krissy. So I'm going to talk a little bit about our communications. So our 2 main sources of communication to schools and districts is through our attendance and chronic absenteeism newsletter and our webpage. Our newsletter currently has over 6,000 subscribers, and this is like a mix of attendance clerks, building administration, truancy liaisons, as well as internal colleagues to our agency. We aim to send out a newsletter at least once a month, providing guidance and policy updates. We announce upcoming webinars in and out-of-state conferences that are in relation to the work of attendance. We share resources and toolkits on attendance and re-engagement. We just sent out our first newsletter of the school year, which provided staff with what are the right now resources, what is the work that they can engage in now, such as promoting attendance awareness materials and attendance letter templates, making sure that schools are updating their templates to have more of a supportive tone and are easy to read. We also use the newsletter to really drive folks to our attendance webpage. Our webpage has attendance awareness toolkits, as well as Attendance Works attendance awareness campaign materials. We have flyers, videos, and message recordings that schools can use. We share best practices to improve attendance, and we really want folks to look at our policy guidance and data reporting page. We receive a lot of emails asking for clarity on attendance laws in our state, and so we really utilize this page to support with guidance. We also highlight past state webinar recordings on our webpage, and this is a resource that we can use for this school year. Next slide. I'm gonna hand it back over to Krissy.
Thank you, Jenna. I put a resource in the chat that shows the attendance awareness resources that we share. We have found it more impactful to provide templates to school districts, as they are the primary communicators to students and parents. The most impactful relationship, funding, and resource that we have in our state right now is through the Attendance and Reengagement Project, specifically our partnerships with the 9 educational service districts. We received ESSER funding to support the ESDs, as well as 27 school districts and state tribal education compact schools, to do 2 things. 1, to hire staff to do something very similar to what Connecticut had done. We recognize that there are students and families that are disconnected from the education system, and we needed to go find them, create relationships, and build a bridge back to the school. And so there are staff that are doing that direct service outreach work through this project. We also are supporting the ESDs to support schools and districts to build their systems. And their systems, what we mean by that is, are they looking at attendance as part of their teaming? Do they have access to attendance data? Have they reviewed their policies and procedures? Those fundamental core components of a multi-tiered system of support, that without those structures, they cannot in any sort of organized or strategic fashion understand why their chronic absence rates are what they are and what they can do about them. So I would say, of all of the things that we're doing, this relationship with the ESDs who are working directly with schools and districts and our boots on the ground, they are informing us as a state agency, saying things like, hey, I talked to a principal the other day, and the only data they have is this pages and pages of printed out lists of students. They don't have a dashboard. They don't know how to get access to graphs that tell them their school-wide chronic absence data. So this relationship has been really, really important as a state agency. Next slide.
Some upcoming resources that we have for all districts. Our ESDs and OSPI, we're developing foundational professional development and a library of resources to kick off this school year. We're focusing on teaming on attendance, accessing and using data, interventions, student voice, district policy and procedures, communications, letters, and awareness raising. We just held our first ever Truancy 101 webinar last week for all school staff to attend. This provided an overview of Washington state laws on truancy. We also had our first foundational session on teaming on attendance last week. We made sure to record both webinars so that they can live on our webpage for anyone to access and can use as an ongoing resource throughout this year. Next slide. We are also holding statewide peer learning networks. This afternoon, we are hosting a district attendance and truancy leads peer learning network. We advertise this network through our newsletter, and we are plan to hold this bi-monthly this school year. And the purpose of this network is to share resources, raise awareness, and provide a space to connect with one another doing similar work across the state. This also gives us the opportunity to learn from school staff who are doing the work on the ground. And then last year, I hosted a re-engagement peer learning network for a re-engagement specialist. This position was new in school, so it was a really good space for collaboration and learning. And then we also held space to convene state tribal education compact schools monthly to connect with one another and talk about best practices for Native students. And we did this in partnership with our Office of Native Education. Next slide.
I shared a little bit about this policy issue around students remaining enrolled or districts withdrawing. And so in our state, school districts have historically withdrawn students after the first 4 days of school. And our approach has been to develop guidance. We're working with our partners to raise awareness. It really requires a commitment from everyone in our system to report absences accurately, because if they keep them enrolled, then they need to report absences to the state. And we are exploring potential future policy changes to really tighten the requirements similar to Connecticut. Next slide. I think this is the last thing we wanted to share before we address some of the lessons learned or next steps for us. And I wanted to share, Kari, I really appreciated your framing of truancy and chronic absence. And we're taking a little bit of a different approach in Washington. We have truancy laws on the books, and we are intentionally trying to support a culture shift around truancy so that truancy is about responding to absences in a proactive and supportive manner. And we are working with our core partners. We are working with our district truancy liaisons, and it feels like we're trying to shift the Titanic, but we have seen changes in the way that people approach this work, even in our courts, particularly because the law requires so many early interventions. We think we have a long way to go. Part of what I'm really excited about is our agency is engaging youth and families in the Re-envisioning Truancy project. So we are working with AIR and one of our local evaluators to really understand the impact of current truancy policies and practices by talking with youth, talking with families, and talking with our education partners. We're doing listening sessions, we're doing interviews, we'll be surveying our partners, all with an aim to develop policy and funding recommendations for our agency leadership next spring. And those recommendations, I'm really excited to see. We have a set of truancy laws that have been on the books and have been tweaked over time. We will also be learning from other states. So if any of you on this call feel like you have figured it out or you're working on figuring it out, please reach out. We want to know what you're doing and what you're thinking. What we know is with these laws on the books, there are people in schools that are required to follow the truancy process, and we don't want a bifurcated system. We don't want the attendance clerk over here having to work by herself to do truancy while the team over here works on chronic absenteeism. Like, they have to be part of the same work, and we're trying to support people to address it with the same philosophy and supportive mindset. Next slide. This is our last slide. We have a lot of opportunity for growth. We collect student level data. We have it in our state level system. We don't publish chronic absenteeism from the previous school year until January of the following year. We have also learned, as I mentioned earlier, that many schools and districts just don't even know how to access the data that they have in their own student information systems to help them make sense of their chronic absence rates, which student groups have higher rates of chronic absence. So we have a lot of work to do around increasing access to data. We used to do a really good job about identifying bright spots, and we need to turn our attention back to that. I really appreciated Kari's mentioning that everybody has bright spots, which is a really wonderful framing. And then we have more work to do to bring together the folks in our agency across divisions who support student groups that experience the highest rates of absences. So for us, that would be our foster youth, McKinney-Vento, special education, and to continue to raise awareness. And
the first thing I do is I gotta get that okay from the city.
So to continue to raise awareness and to collaborate with one another around advocacy. And then hopefully through that work, we could be working on developing a strategic plan in coordination with our leadership. So those were some lessons learned or opportunities for growth. Thanks again for inviting us to speak and share, and I look forward to any questions or learning from you all.
Great. Thanks so much, Krissy. And we actually have a number of questions that have come in. It looks like our panelists have been answering some of the questions in the chat. So let us know if you need any additional information. But to start off, could both of you talk a little bit about how you're promoting Attendance Awareness Month and sort of generally how you work with your communications around attendance-related issues? I know you've talked a little bit about this, but any other practices, approaches, successful strategies that you'd like to highlight?
I can jump in. I said a little bit about this. Initially, we took on, it's the state's job to communicate to students and families. And I think over several years, we really started to step away from that because you never know what a student or family's experience will be with school, and any messaging that we could come up with might really land poorly. And so what we tried to do is, we created templates for school districts to adapt for their own use. So that was one of the big strategic pivots that we made.
Thanks, Krissy. I see folks have dropped a couple of those resources in the chat, and we'll also include those resources in the thank you note that goes out for this webinar, so you can all have access to that. Kari, anything else to add? Any especially successful communication strategies that have been helpful to get the word across to parents? Oh, you're still on mute.
I put in the chat, we have a regular communication that goes out to superintendents from our commissioner. And whenever those are related to policies, attendance and engagement, we definitely get them out to all of our district attendance leads. We also have a family engagement roundtable. So we use that for messaging with families. We're starting a LEAP family engagement roundtable too. So not only just getting messages out to them, but having a two-way conversation with families as partners, and not just us telling them, but hearing from them as well.
Great. And again, we're dropping those resources in the chat. Another question for both states was about how long did it take you to align policies, and how long did that process take? And were there any particular challenges? How did you work on aligning the policies around attendance, on data collection, right? All the different policies you have to coordinate to move to the place you are today.
It's been a journey, I guess is the one way to say it. Is, you know, every couple of years something new comes along to improve what we've had in the past. We started with our definition, which I think is the definition of attendance is key. I know there's states that don't have a common definition. I would say that it's ongoing, and I don't think we're ever finished. You know, we don't monitor for compliance on a lot of things either. So it's just building those relationships and helping them learn best practices instead of enforcing policy as much.
So collaborative approach. I also heard highlighting common definitions around attendance, really, really important.
Yes.
Krissy, Jenna, any reflections from Washington?
I would just reiterate everything Kari said, and I think it means that our communication efforts become that much more important around getting out the guidance and getting out the best practices and providing space for folks to learn about those, because we too do not have a monitoring team to make sure that we that all districts' policies are up to date.
All right, and another question for both states in regards to SEA capacity to do the work. What's the number of FTEs that are dedicated to attendance and engagement in each of your states? And if they're ESSER funded, what's your sustainability plan to maintain those staff? So sort of the brass tacks question, how much staff time does this kind of work take, and how do you pay for it?
Well, at the State Department of Education, I'm the one person who leads attendance and engagement, but just as in schools, it's all hands on deck. It's everyone is working with districts around, especially we have consultants who are liaisons to particular districts, and they know a lot about attendance. So it's kind of hard to to come up with that. We have one full-time person you'd say with attendance, but everybody works on attendance.
So at least having one person whose full-time job it is, and then it sounds like it's sort of lesser amounts of time for folks who have other primary responsibilities, but it's a lot of folks. It's a lot of those folks, right?
And there's folks in our performance office who do the data and assessment. There's folks in there who are responsible for the attendance data. So there's that too. I'm not sure how much of her time is just on attendance data, but so it's kind of hard to say. And my position is state funded, so it's not ESSER dollars.
Okay, so you wouldn't have to worry about replacing
your
salary if ESSER funding went away. And at the state level, what's that structure that brings everybody together? You talked about committee meetings. Talk to us a little bit about what that looks like. How do you get folks in the same room to work on attendance?
We have cross-divisional teams who have different folks from different parts. So we'll have, like, for instance, a cross-divisional team for Hartford and one for New Haven. And if those districts have a goal in their turnaround plan on attendance and engagement, then I would be on that. If they have a goal on multilingual learners, they would be on that team as well, or special ed. And we tend to just I think because we've been doing it so long, there's someone in special ed, a colleague, Jay Brown, who knows all about attendance and engagement. And he and I work together on Talk Tuesday, and IDEA funds pay for Talk Tuesday. So it's just become sort of, we used to have internal meetings once a month or so, but we tend to just work together really well at this point.
Right, and Krissy and Jenna, I saw in the chat you said you've got a 1.5 full-time position focused on chronic absenteeism. Anything else to add there? Any key lessons learned? You get the last word.
I wanted to add on to what Kari just said. We've, in addition to big projects where we collaborate across the agency, when we need to respond to a school or district or support a school or district, a lot of that collaboration comes through working with our special education department. And so, just like Kari said, we've built a lot of capacity and understanding awareness across different parts of the agency as there's a nexus between attendance and 504 or attendance and safety, or if you can think of it, it's there, that linkage. So that's all.
Great. Thanks so much, Krissy. And we are at time, so I want to give one last round of thanks to our panelists. Again, you'll get a thank you note that will include all of the resources that have been mentioned in the chat and contact information. Again, we encourage you to reach out directly to Washington and Connecticut. And again, SEAC is always happy to help broker those conversations. So if you heard things that you like and want to learn more, we're here to help you figure out how to connect with folks. So thanks again to everyone on the webinar. Be on the lookout for additional SEAC technical assistance events. And again, thank you so much to both Connecticut and Washington for letting us learn from all of your hard work. Thanks, everyone. Until our next TA activity, we will see you soon.